We're going to get into that. Actually, we're going to do our interview first, and then I'll go back to that a little later on. Okay, so for today's interview, we have we're connecting with Dudley Poston, a professor of sociology, and he's at the Texas A&M University. So let's see. I believe he's in Korea right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I'm in Seoul right now.
Oh, you are? Well, welcome to our program. Thanks for coming on with us.
Thank you.
So first of all, Professor, if you could tell us a little bit about how gender or sex demographics are changing worldwide.
Well, the overall sex ratio is not balanced, and as a population gets older, you have more women. So because women live longer than men, so the sex ratio tends to favor women, particularly in the older ages.
Mm.
But at birth, almost in all societies, there are 105 boys born for every 100 girls. Every place. And that then guarantees that there'll be about the same number of boys and girls at marriage age, maybe age 25, age 30 or so.
Mm. Interesting, yes.
The big advantage that South Korea has is South Korea had an unbalanced sex ratio at birth, maybe reaching as high as 115, 117.
Mm-hmm.
But then they brought it back to normal levels, and Korea is the only country that's ever had a severely imbalanced sex ratio at birth that has been able to bring it back to normal levels.
Ah, well, do you think that might be due to the fact that, a couple decades ago, the government passed laws to make sure that doctors were not able to reveal the sex of an unborn child?
Well, that could be part of it, but also the other countries that have not been able to return to a normal level, like China, Taiwan, India, they have laws also that make it a crime for the doctors to use sonar technology to determine the sex of the fetus. So I don't know. I mean, that could be a part of it. There are a number of issues. There was a conference in Busan in 2013, International Demography Conference, and there was one panel there with 5 very prominent Korean demographers asking the question that you just asked. How did Korea return? And every one of them had a different answer.
Oh.
So there doesn't seem to be any agreement in how it was done. One person said what you just said about doctors not being allowed. Others mentioned the fact that in Korea abortion is illegal, and maybe the government was putting more authority in. So there are a lot of different reasons, but all we know is Korea was able to get it back to normal. There's just not agreement in terms of why.
Right. Well, I was looking at some charts online. I looked at a couple sources because I thought maybe one source was very skewed, but if I'm not mistaken, some of the countries like Qatar and the UAE and Bahrain.
Oh yeah, they're way out of line.
Why is that? I'm so curious as to why.
Like Qatar and United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, they have societal sex ratios of over 200, meaning there are 200 men for every 100 women.
Yes.
And what that is this is mainly labor migrants from South Asia, from Pakistan, Bangladesh, who are coming in. They're mainly men, and they're mainly young men, and they're coming in to do jobs in construction. They're contract laborers. They're only allowed to stay in the country for 2 or 3 years, and then they must return. They're not able to obtain citizenship. But you're right. Those are way, sometimes 250, 300 is the sex ratio.
Right. And then on the very other end, I was curious. So I looked at the other end of the spectrum, and then I see lots of countries maybe of the former Soviet Union, like Estonia and Ukraine and Latvia.
Well, what happened happened there was in the Soviet bloc, that's showing the excess number of deaths to men. Excess number of deaths to men. A lot of for the older men, it's mainly going to be from World War II. That was a tremendous devastation. But for many of the younger men, there's a lot of evidence that there's increased alcoholism and dangerous activities, which are putting men much more at the risk of death. So that's why you see the other end of the spectrum, like you just mentioned.
Oh, well, thanks for explaining. I was very, very curious about why it was so skewed on both sides. Well, Professor, other than things like war that you've already mentioned, what are some other factors, everyday factors affecting sex ratio numbers in humans?
Well, first of all, women live longer than men.
Yes.
Because they have the much better hormone estrogen, and that's very good for your system, whereas men have testosterone, and it's not good for their heart. So the reason why women live longer than men, it's really genetic. So what happens then with regard to migration? If there's a lot of people leaving a country to go to another country, you have the sex ratio increasing where the people are going, if they're mainly men, like you just mentioned with UAE and Qatar. But then when they leave those countries, the sex ratio of Qatar and the sex ratio of the UAE becomes more prominent for women because most of the people who have left that country are men. So migration is a major part of the answer.
Migration,
yeah.
So in terms of some of the possible other factors, as the one you said, there was a panel from 2 years ago.
Sure.
What were I'm curious as to maybe one or two of the other factors aside from not being able to reveal the sex of an unborn fetus?
Well, another advantage that one of the commentators was mentioning was the increased educational and occupational levels for women in Korea. This person was mentioning Korea has experienced dramatic increases in educational levels.
Yes.
And that then makes the woman much less likely to have a lot of son preference as she becomes more modernized, higher education. The old Confucian heritage of having to have a boy becomes less important.
Yes.
So that might have been a reason why the sex ratio drops back to normal levels. It's very interesting. I would love to know exactly what the reason is, but I suspect there are many reasons, and I found it very interesting. These 5 very prominent demographers, all of them from Korea, from Seoul, from Busan, they couldn't agree in terms of what the major reason was, and we just talked now about 3 of them.
Yes. Professor, do you think that sometimes we need certain policies when there is such kind of a skew in the numbers?
Well, I think we do see the policies with regard to the government making it a criminal offense for doctors to identify the sex of the fetus. I think we do see some of those, but I think a lot of it is really more societal. As societies become more modernized and men and women become more educated and have higher status jobs, I think the old traditional beliefs of having to have a boy in the family just don't play as much of a role. So I think more than policy, it's really more increasing levels of education and modernization. And we see that in South Korea.
Right. Well, may I ask, if you don't mind, what you're doing in Seoul? Is it related to anything that we're talking about, or is it something else?
Well, with Seoul, the other big issue in South Korea is the very, very low fertility rate, the lowest fertility rate in the world, 1.15 babies per woman is the average. So there is a symposium sponsored by the KIASA, the Korean Institute of Health and Social Affairs.
Yes.
And I came over, gave a talk yesterday on mainly about how immigration might be a way to address this issue, because it's very difficult once a country drops below a fertility rate of 1.4 to raise it again. It's called in demography the low fertility trap. And I just entertained with the audience. There were some government people there and some professors. I just entertained with the audience possible ways that immigration might work. But since Korea sends a small percentage, only less than 3% of Korea is foreign-born, I think the agreement was that it might be difficult for people to be that accepting of immigrants because it would disturb this long 5,000 years of Korean history.
Right.
And it's a very different situation from my country, the United States, which
Yes.
is, my country is a country of immigrants.
Of course, yes.
So it's a very different situation. So I'm going back home today to Texas.
Oh, you are? Well, thank you so much for coming on with us. I hope you enjoyed your stay in
thank
Korea.
you. I enjoyed speaking to you. Would you ask your assistant if she could send me the link to this program?
Oh, absolutely. I'll do that.
I'd like to hear it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Once again, that was our expert for today, Professor Dudley Poston, who is a professor of sociology, and the George T. and Gladys Abel Professor of Liberal Arts at Texas A&M.